So thank you for coming tonight. Look around. I mean, you see that a lot of people have come out and basically filled this theater on a Wednesday evening on the subject of mindfulness. And if we start to practice, as you were describing, just watching your breath, for instance, and we did that for a while, which I think we should. If someone came in from the outside that had no idea what was going on, they'd say, what are these people doing? They're like zombies, or they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. And so from the outside, it looks like they're not doing anything, and all this talk about mindfulness and the hype around mindfulness is like much ado about nothing, easily dismissed. And I like to say, Shakespeare did write a play called Much Ado About Nothing. So this does look like much ado about nothing, because nothing is happening. And imagine if, I gave a talk, and this was the talk. How long do you think it would take before all of you leave? There's not one person sitting here. I don't think it would take that long. So part of my job is to entertain you long enough so that you'll actually get that it looks like much ado about nothing, and may sound like much ado about nothing, but it's more accurate to say it's much ado about what looks a lot like nothing and turns out to be just about everything. Turns out to be just about everything. And this is, of course, totally un-American. So I want to sort of, in the spirit of full disclosure, say right off the bat, it looks awfully un-American because, what is America about if not getting it done? Doing. We're like the world's best doers, can do. That's like us, But have you ever sort of felt like there's no end to the doing? And that, there's no end to the to-do list? And you go to sleep and the to-do list is not finished, and you wake up and it's longer the next day and it's longer the next week, and it's like... And Thoreau had something very interesting to say about this. He said in Walden, which itself is a total rhapsody for mindfulness, wakefulness. He said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front, meaning confront, only those facts of life, and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I hadn't lived. And I appreciated your introduction, Manoj, because you can easily think that when you get still, that it's all about shutting down your thinking. Because the first thing that happens when you get still is you notice that your mind doesn't get still just because you decide, oh, now I'm going to be a good meditator. To hell with that, the mind's just going to have a life of its own. It's like the ocean. Have you heard of the ocean in Tennessee? It's like a long way away. You don't get to see it every day, I know. But it's like any big body of water. The surface waves depending on atmospheric conditions, right? When the atmosphere is really calm, there's no wind, no tornadoes in Tornado Alley, it's like glass. And at other times, tremendous turbulence. It's not a bad metaphor for the mind. The surface of the mind, turbulent a lot of the time, depending on the atmospheric conditions, how stressful things are, what kind of challenges there are in your life, what the circumstances of the moment are. Mind is just constantly going. Most of it's thinking and emotional reactivity. And it's imprisoning in a certain way because it's sort of confining. Excuse me for a sec. I came from winter, and this is spring, and so I think there's some pollen in the air or something. So every once in a while, I'll shut off the mic. Clear my throat. And So the problem isn't that the mind does this. The problem is that we're not intimate with the mind, that we don't understand it enough, so we get caught in every wave that the mind produces. And a lot of it is fearful. A lot of it is, I've never been to Memphis before, as far as I know. I mean, maybe I was here as a child, but like in Memphis, like, do people worry? You think that people get anxious about the future? Do you think that they spend a lot of time planning for things that haven't happened yet? Anybody in that situation yourself? I mean, so if you start to pay attention to where your mind is at, whether it's calm or whether it's not, a lot of the time, the content of the mind is, it's in the future. And when it's not in the future, where's its other favorite place to hang out? Yeah, the past. Perseverating over who did what to whom, who's to blame for all of this, why I'm not better, it's like, what are the causes of it? Someone's got to be to blame, and it can't be me. Or maybe it is me, and then you beat yourself up. How helpful is that? Meanwhile, guess what? The present moment is the only moment any of us ever have to be alive in. And yet, if you add up how much we're in the future, how much we're in the past, present moment tends to get a little squeezed to the point where we're lost in thought so much of the time. Underscore the lost part. It's not the thought that's the problem. Thinking is just like waving on the ocean. It's just the natural way the mind does stuff. And there's nothing wrong with thinking. I mean, this is an institution of higher education. We need to be really good at thinking. But thinking's a double-edged sword, because a lot of time you get into bed and you have a big day the next day and you really want to go to sleep. You lie down, shut off the lights, really nice and comfortable, and then some little thought secretes itself into your mind, and you realize 3 hours later that you're still awake. The mind won't shut down, and the more you force yourself to go to sleep, what happens? So even falling asleep is a problem when we need to sleep. Then, when we need to meditate, we're going to fall asleep. And when we do it in the hospital, when we train people in what we call mindfulness-based stress reduction, we do it lying down. Because a lot of people are in so much pain, they couldn't sit in the full lotus posture or any cross-legged posture on the floor or even on a chair for any period of time. So we do it lying down. Well, that's an occupational hazard for falling asleep. But what mindfulness is really about is falling awake. Now, I've really moved that Rhodes College is developing a compassion week and a compassion initiative. And so the question comes up of, well, I haven't mentioned the word compassion yet. I'm just talking about mindfulness. Where's the compassion? So I want to come to that. But before I do, I'd like to invite us to just drop in. All of you have better things to do on a Wednesday night than to be here, hearing about what looks a lot like nothing. So it took a lot of energy to get here, right? At the end of a long day, work day. I really appreciate the young people in the room. Welcome to you. If I knew you were coming, I would have brought some extra kinds of things, like I have a movie on my laptop. It only lasts a minute. I'll describe it for you so that at least this part of the talk is for you, and everybody else, let's pretend. Do you know about the movie? You say it's fine, I don't need to talk to you? Okay. Well, I don't want to put you on the spot. But let me just describe it because it's relevant anyway. So there's a movie, maybe some of you have seen it, but where you have 3 people in white T-shirts and 3 people in black T-shirts in front of 3 elevators in a hallway, in an institutional building. And when you press play on the movie, they start to move around, passing a basketball among themselves. The black T-shirts are passing a basketball, and the white T-shirts are passing another basketball. And your job, your assignment, is to count the number of times the people in the black shirts pass the basketball before the movie ends. And the movie's going to end quickly, okay? So you push play, and they're walking around in between each other, dribbling, passing, and meanwhile, everybody in the audience is counting. And then, in the middle of this, do you know what happens in the middle?
Yes.
What happens?
Like a gorilla.
Yes. A gorilla comes in from one side. I can see why you guys came into this talk in the first place. Do you want to come up here and help tell the story or give the rest of the talk? You'd be welcome to. So the gorilla comes in. How many of you have not seen this movie? Okay, almost nobody's seen the movie. So a gorilla comes in from this side. They're doing their thing. He walks right through them, and he turns full frontal and goes, and then walks off to the side. And then, so you show the movie to an audience like this, hundreds of people. I've done it with thousands of people. And then you say, okay, what's the count? How many times did the people in the black shirts pass the basketball? And the hands go up, and people say 12, and some people 13, and more people say 14, more people say 15, and less people say 16. And, it's like, you got people, they've all gone to school, they've all gone to college, everybody knows how to count, and yet they're giving you different numbers. Interesting. Then you ask, did anybody notice anything unusual during this movie? And a few hands go up. I tell people to be silent so that they don't laugh, if they do see the gorilla. But most people, they say, what do you mean? Did you notice anything unusual? Then I say, okay, now I'll play the movie again. This time, don't count the basketballs, just look at the movie. And they start out moving the basketballs, and then out comes the gorilla, and you hear a gasp in the audience. Just oh my God. Because you realize, and then people say things like to me, you changed the movie on me. The gorilla wasn't there the first time. The gorilla was there the first time. But think about it. I asked you to count the number of times the people in the black shirts. I told the story wrong. You count the number of times the people in the white shirts pass the basketball. I haven't told the story in a long time. So it's the number of times the people in the white shirts pass the basketball. And so the mind goes, I know what to do. Tune out everything that's black. Okay? And we're really good at that. So you don't actually see the gorilla because it's dressed in it's a black costume. So you just tuned out everything that's black. So the gorilla comes into your eyeballs. It registers through the optic nerve to the occipital cortex. But someplace between the occipital cortex and what Manoj mentioned about the prefrontal cortex, it gets inhibited. And you don't see the gorilla. And about 90% of people don't see the gorilla. So I told this story because of the kids in the audience, and they already seen the movie and know all of this. So that's a perfect example of the fact that, the children, I don't even know why you came. You don't need mindfulness. I mean, it's the big people that need the mindfulness. You guys are already in the present moment. So the real challenge is, you came for your parents, going like this to your mom, okay? So your parents really need it. They are, what should we call it? They need some remedial training in paying attention, okay? Because a lot of time we're out to lunch. And we've been out to lunch for thousands of years, but now we have even more opportunities to be out to lunch. This is the kind of thing, for instance, like, so that we can be more connected. We're so connected to everything that, we forget that we're even alive. This becomes more important than this. And if you, sooner or later, you're going to have to call up yourself and check, Jon, are you actually present? Do you feel your breath? Do you feel anything? What are you feeling? Are you in touch with your body? Do you know your feet are flat on the floor, whatever? And then I'm going to get a bill from Verizon or, AT&T. So the point is that when we really pay attention and don't get caught in our own ideas about, when you challenge people to count the basketballs, I don't know if this is true for children, but all the big people, they go through a similar kind of thing. The thing is, I want to get the right answer. It becomes a competition. I'm going to get that answer. So you're paying so much attention to the white shirts that are passing the basketballs that you just don't see what's right on your eyeballs. And would you say that sometimes happens in families? Has anybody in your family ever said to you, you really don't understand what's going on, do you? And you got 1,000 reasons why you're right and they're all wrong, right? They're trying to tell you, look, there's a gorilla there. And you said, no, there's no gorilla there. So be on the lookout. There are gorillas everywhere, and a lot of the time we're tuning out because we see what we want to see, not what's actually present. That's true for the outer world. It's also true for the inner world. The good news is you can regulate your attention and fine-tune it and actually refine it and deepen it to the point where living itself becomes an art form, just what Thoreau was saying. You cultivate the present moment as if it's an art form. He actually said that at a certain point. And then every moment, present moment, becomes an opportunity to live your way into the next moment. If you want the future to be different, for instance, well, just think, what's the only leverage that any of us have on the future? If we want the future to be different, the only way we can have the future be different is if we're in this moment. If we're in this moment, that's going to change the next moment because you're awake and present and open for this one. So it's like an incredible gift. Then imagine if you could string a few moments together. Now, what I'm talking about is actually hard. Not so much for children, but for big people, it's hard. You have to, exercise the muscle of mindfulness to actually cultivate this capacity to inhabit the present moment and cultivate intimacy with things as they are, as opposed to how you want them to be, what you're blind to, or what you're willing to see. You probably know that Mark Twain, who lived a state or two over from here, I think, for part of his life, Mark Twain is famous for having said, there's been a huge amount of tragedy in my life, and some of it actually happened. But we're not smart enough to actually prognosticate the future, so most of the time, we're dying 1,000 deaths, thinking about and worrying about things that are not going to happen. Meanwhile, we get blindsided by the gorillas. You hear what I'm saying? We can actually flip that, turn that around, and start being aware of things as they are, rather than things as we want them to be by getting lost in our own thinking and perseverating. And then the emotions, many of them quite disturbing and destructive, that are coupled with our thinking. That's what mindfulness is all about. That's what meditation is about. Now, if I take my seat like this in the morning, Marjolaine says, his evening meditation or morning meditation or whatever, I think of it as kind of like a tuning of the instrument. Does Memphis have a Memphis Symphony Orchestra? Okay. Good musicians? Good instruments? Play good music? Do they get together and just sort of go right at it? No, they don't, I'm sure. They tune their instruments, right? They tune, and then they tune to each other. So that's what this is. It's like, this is now being taught in schools, K through 12. Tuning the instrument to learning. A lot of kids come to school nowadays, they're not ready to learn. Some of them haven't even had breakfast. Some of them had experienced, violence of one kind or another before they come to school. Their cognitive, sort of repertoire is, in some sense, highly disturbed. Why not teach them how to pay attention, how to calm down, how to focus and center, rather than yelling at them to pay attention? And of course, you can make interesting points and show them things like the gorilla movie, and it's like, wow, cool. Why not do it that way? So and now I've been meditating both. Let me just say right off the bat that no matter what door you enter into this domain that we're talking about, and whether you call it mindfulness or whether you call it compassion or whether you call it attention or whatever, they're all different doors into the same room, and I'll make that point a little bit further on around mindfulness and compassion, and even share a study or two with you about it. But when you symbolically or literally take your seat, I've come over the decades that I've been practicing to actually realize that this is a radical act. Just to stop. Just to shut your phone off or put it in another room and drop in on yourself, on your own life. Befriend yourself with no agenda, no to-do list, not fill it up with stuff, but just move from all the doing to being. So when we drop in, it's a radical act of sanity to stop for a moment and recoup. It's like retuning the instrument, right? And then when you begin doing, imagine if the doing came out of the stillness and clarity of being. If there is any stillness and clarity of being, and a lot of the time there won't be, because just what Manoj was saying, you sit down with every intention for this to be a love affair with life, and then you start thinking and drive yourself insane. And a lot of it could be thinking about meditating, like you should get back to the breath. Why your mind is wandering, and this meditation's stupid anyway, and how much time has gone by, and oh, my butt hurts, and it's like on and on and on. And it's like, well, where's the meditating in that? It's just like torture. It's just self-torture. Why would I do something like this? And the interesting thing is, all of that could be the curriculum. It's not like any of that's a mistake. That's the ocean waving. The question is, how are you going to be in relationship to it? How are you going to be in relationship to it? And one way of thinking about it is that the mind, the surface waves, but it's like the surface of the ocean. If you drop down 30 or 40 meters in the ocean, even in a hurricane or a typhoon, it's like this. Silent, calm. The mind, the depths of the mind, silent, calm, and because it's the mind and not the Atlantic Ocean, it's knowing. And when I use the word knowing, especially dangerous to do in an institution of higher learning, it's not the kind of knowing that's merely conceptual. We have a whole range of intelligences that allow us to know. Seeing, for instance. Seeing things that are not there. Like I could show you another slide on the PowerPoint I don't have, where you would actually see 3 Pac-Mans positioned in such a way that it looks like there's a triangle. It's called the Kanitsa triangle. It's a very famous optical illusion. You know it. Yeah, you guys. Fantastic. I love you guys. So anyway, you see a triangle. There's no triangle there. So the eye and the mind can make something appear that's actually not there. Okay? On the other hand, it can not see something that's really there, like the gorilla. So when we become intimate with our minds, then it's possible to liberate ourselves from the prison of habitual non-awareness, habitual unawareness, that actually, that's what the people in our family are trying to say to us. Like, wake up, this person's not so bad. Your opinion of them is like off. They say, no, that's my opinion. I hate her. That's the end of it. She's stupid. You know, then we get quite judgmental. And mindfulness, let me just say, my working definition of it is that it's awareness, okay? It's the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, because that's the only moment that we have, and non-judgmentally. And the non-judgmental part is the kicker. Because when you start to, if you want to sit down and do it, or lie down, or run, or whatever, as soon as you start watching the mind, you'll notice, non-judgmental, I got judgments about virtually everything. I like this, I don't like this, I want that, I don't want that, and it's like judging constantly. So the non-judgmental doesn't mean wipe out the judgments. It means suspend it gently, compassionately, as best you can, and don't judge the judging. And all of a sudden, there's like a shift. You can experience this not after 50 years of meditating in a cave in the Himalayas. You can experience it anywhere, at any moment. There's a shift, and all of a sudden, what's happening is okay, and your awareness is knowing it in a way that's not merely conceptual. There may be thoughts about it, but there's much more of a kind of non-conceptual apprehension of the actuality of it. Like when you see your child, how many of you are parents, have children? You know, and sometimes you just catch yourself seeing the face of a child, no matter how old, and you drop away from all the thoughts about your child and who they are and all of that stuff, and you just see them as they are and recognize, it's my child. It's uncanny. It's a miracle. I mean, it's like there's no story that you could tell that's big enough. But when you fall into the stories, there are lots of little stories that are, it's never good enough, or it's you can like create all these narratives that a lot of the time in families, they're actually harming. Even if they're great stories, they're harming because they're imprisoning. Now I have to be the good boy all the time, or the great creative one, or the successful Nobel laureate, or whatever it is. And it's like, please, that's a straitjacket for me. What about just seeing me as I am? So this is, again, it's something we can cultivate. We can exercise the muscle. And that's actually what the word meditation means. In Pali, the original language of the Buddha, the word for meditation is bhavana, which means cultivation, which is an agricultural term which has to do with planting seeds and then watering them. So we're planting the seed of, first of all, dignity. We're sitting with ourselves with a sense of dignity, okay? So that would be like, to the degree that you can handle it, not West Point, military, but just also not like, but, you take a stand sitting in your life, and it's like, it's a radical act of sanity just to do this, and what I've come to experience for myself, it's a radical act of love. Seriously. Love of what? It almost doesn't matter. Love of not being dead in this moment. That like, hey, the breath is still doing it. If it were up to you to be breathing, you would have died a long time ago. You're so unreliable, it's like, we say, it's my breath, I'm breathing. We say I'm breathing, don't we? But let's face it, if it were up to you to be breathing, you get a text or something comes up and you get distracted and like, whoops, dead. So whoever you think you are, you're not allowed anywhere near the brainstem and the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm. You're just not, yes, you can hold your breath, but you can't end your life by holding your breath. No way. You're just not reliable enough to keep the breath going. Never mind the heartbeat. No, you're not allowed there. But still, you think my heart is beating. If it were up to you, your heart wouldn't be beating because you're just too unreliable, too distractible. So that's all taken care of. And in fact, in that sense, you could say life is just a gift. Total gift. Now, when we do lying down meditations, we do it in something called the corpse pose. It's like, I'll demonstrate, I don't know if you can see it at the back, but you lie down on your back and your feet fall away from each other and your arms are not touching the sides and your palms are open if you care to, towards the ceiling. So it's very vulnerable, but it's a very available position. You can do this in bed, and I highly recommend you do it in bed in the morning, so that when you wake up, you make sure you're awake before you get out of bed. You could take another 3 seconds or 3 breaths or 30 minutes or whatever you want, and they're like, you can't, no excuse, like you're already there. And it's called the corpse pose. Why is it called the corpse pose? Well, it's because the invitation is to die. Die now, get it over with. Then the rest of your life will be absolutely gravy, And what would you die to? Well, die to the future. I'm dead now, no more future. I'm dead now, no more past, no more story of me, no more narrative about it. Then all of a sudden, you're in some sense fully alive in this moment. Because the breath is still doing itself in spite of you and how much stress you're under and how, the stories you tell yourself about how inadequate I am or how unworthy I am or all of the stuff that we do, or who's to blame for why my life didn't turn out the way it should have. And all of this is kind of second order stuff. The real stuff is this moment you are awake and aware, and then new possibilities emerge because you're not getting in your own way and beating yourself up around how anxious you are, how depressed you are. So when we do this in the hospital with people who have major depressive disorder or major anxiety and panic disorder or heart disease or any kinds of cancer or anything, people actually discover one thing, basically. Well, the first thing, if you ask them, well, what did you get out of this? The first thing they'll say is the breathing. I said, wait a minute, that's pretty weird. You were breathing before you came. You've been breathing your whole life. Why all of a sudden 8 weeks of mindfulness and the breathing? You were breathing all along. What they really mean is, I woke up to my breathing. I became aware of my breathing. I know how to use it to drop in on myself, as if I was worthy to actually visit myself, befriend myself, and not have to do anything. That I was okay as I am, that I'm already whole, which is the root meaning of health and healing. And holy, H-O-L-Y, by that, for that matter. So this is what true health is complete integration of experience. It's not by editing your experience to say, okay, this stuff we're going to shove away and lock in the closet because I'm unworthy. A lot of us as kids got that message, that there were parts of you that were not okay, and we don't want to see that. And then that can, repress parts that can harm you for the rest of your life if you don't welcome them back in, put out the welcome mat, and so forth. Recover the full dimensionality of your being. But when you start to engage in this way, we say to our patients who come with every conceivable diagnosis, some not that far away from dying, we say to them, listen, from our perspective, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And we're going to pour energy in the form of awareness and attention into what's right with you. Let the rest of the hospital and medical team take care of what's wrong and see what happens 8 weeks later. These are people with cancer, heart disease, every kind of chronic pain condition. And 8 weeks later, the vast majority of them are reporting, far fewer symptoms, both psychological as well as actual, frank medical, physical symptoms. Much more optimism, much more sense of well-being, and a sense of gratitude and deep connection with themselves and with other people. And what are they doing this whole time? Various arrangements of nothing. There's like the lying down nothing, there's the standing nothing, there's the walking nothing. Of course, we don't call it nothing, we call it meditation or mindfulness. But really, what it is, it's awareness. And so it means well, you already have it. You don't have to acquire anything. Again, the doing. The Americans, we're so great. We'll go out and we'll get enlightened. Hopeless. But what if you flip that? Maybe, what if you're already enlightened? And you're just not recognizing that, first of all, like, well, what's not working for you? I mean, think about it for a moment. By the way, if you're wondering when the meditation is coming, this is as much a guided meditation as if I shut up. Once I shut up, you'll start wondering, when is he going to start talking again? Because the silence is killing me. But there's no separation, really. Life is the real meditation practice, not this. But this is like a very, very deep portal into who you are. And it's very easy to miss. And that's what Thoreau was talking about. Like, you go your whole life, and then just before you die, you realize, I got the whole curriculum wrong. As the business people say, you're climbing the ladder, stepping on people to get to the top of the ladder, and then realizing when you get to the top of the ladder, you put it against the wrong wall. And then you die. So you can see that the lying down meditation, the corpse poses in yoga or in meditation, very powerful, powerful approach. Die now, get it over with, the rest of your life, free. Or die moment by moment. Every out-breath, dying. Luckily, the next in-breath comes, and you're not responsible for it either. If you've ever been with somebody who's dying, you know, the breath goes out, another breath doesn't come in. It's very, very moving, very, very humbling. So that means living life as if it really mattered while we have the chance. And the only chance we ever have is now. And the curriculum, in the sense, is anything that arises. So when we drop in, if you're thinking and you're aware that you're thinking, you're meditating. If you're lost in thought, then you're not meditating anymore. You're lost. But as soon as you know you're lost in thought, you're back. So you don't need to do anything. And then you'll get lost again, come back again, lost again, back again, lost again. But something starts to grow. Mind goes off, you bring it back. Mind goes off, you recognize what drove your mind off, bring it back. Mind goes off, you bring it back. Mind goes off. And it's so interesting. This particular narrative, maybe it's like, you know, sort of very spicy in one way or another. The children in the audience, I won't say all the various ways that it could be spicy. You don't want to come back. You would come back anyway. Let go. Let it be. You don't have to push it away, judge it or anything, but you come back. And over time, you're then working with your own resistance. Because you don't want to come back, you come back anyway. Something starts to grow, and it's a lot more interesting than a bicep. A lot more interesting than a bicep. It's, you know, some people might put it as like, what grows is who you really are. What came up in the mind was, maybe I should say, character. But character doesn't quite do it, but it's like pointing in that direction. It's like who you really are. And you know, the interesting thing about that is the most honest answer, if you were to ask me, who are you? Some people say to me, oh, you know, they recognize me in an airport or something like that. It's come to that. It's like horrible. But not really, because, you know, it's like they know about mindfulness and they associate me with it. They say, oh, are you Jon Kabat-Zinn? And I'll say, I was the last time I checked. But the really authentic answer to that, if I ask myself, which is one of the most powerful meditation practices, who am I? Mostly I'd answer, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not the narratives in my head. I'm not the story of me, starring me. Whether the story is a happy story, you know, a comedy or a tragedy, it's not that those things might not be partially true, but they're not true enough. We're much bigger than our stories. We're much bigger than the narrative. And when we learn to inhabit that space, well, you find, for instance, the boundary of your own awareness. Now remember, you don't have to get it, you already have it, but you probably don't spend a lot of time hanging out in that domain. But what if you did? What if you learned to rest in awareness? Like watching the movie without counting the basketballs or tuning out the black shirts. You'd be seeing what's here to be seen, and through all the senses, hearing what's here to be heard, tasting what's here to be tasted, like your food, touching what's here to be touched. Have you ever been hugged mindlessly? Have you ever had a mindless hug by somebody? It's like, oh, God, you have to check into a hospital and recover from, give me an IV, because when someone's out of their body, they're also out of their mind. And so it doesn't feel like connection. And they're not aware of it. You're aware of it, and then you have to sort of, how do I deal with that? A lot of people just go limp, just till it's over. So this is a process of, in some sense, reclaiming our lives. So let's take a few moments before I go into the compassion piece, and let's take a few moments and just drop in. Would you be up for that? Because actually, you're already dropped in. I mean, I happen to be talking. So what's the difference between talking and silence? It's all experience. So let's actually attend to, and there are many different ways to cultivate awareness or intimacy with awareness or access to awareness. And it does help to, at the beginning stages of this at least, to actually pick out one of a number of objects of attention. Okay? It's because it's harder if you don't have something to focus on. So, as Manoj was saying, I mean, very common in all meditative traditions is like, you are breathing. We've already established it's not you doing it, but it is here, and it's a very interesting life force, and it is, in some sense, deeply connected to thinking and emotion, because if you get emotional, your breathing is going to change very, very rapidly. So why don't we just drop in on how things are now, sitting here in a posture that for you embodies wakefulness and dignity, even at 8 o'clock on a work night when you could have gone someplace else and chose to come here. So let's see if we can be here 100% with sitting here breathing. And you realize you do not have to do anything. You're already breathing. You're already sitting. And I'm not asking you to think about your breathing or about your body. I'm asking you to feel it and just be at home with the actuality of being here now, because we're here now. And if you like, you can ride on the waves of your own breathing with full awareness. Breath comes in, breath leaves the body. See if you can actually feel each breath coming in, and then the inflection point and each breath leaving the body. No agenda other than to be present and feel, stay in touch with the object of attention. And rest in awareness of breathing and the body sitting here, breathing. You can do it with your eyes open, you can do it with your eyes closed. Whatever feels most comfortable to you. And then one other helpful instruction is that sooner or later, just as we were discussing, you're going to forget about your breathing, and your mind is going to be off someplace else. When you notice it, notice what's on your mind in that moment. And then without judging it or you, just let it be as it is and return to the place in your body, whether it's your abdomen or your chest or your nostrils, where the breath sensations are most vivid for you, and just come back to the feeling of breathing, the body sitting here breathing. And if the mind wanders 100,000 times, each time, without judging, you notice what's on your mind, you let it be, and you come back to awareness of breathing. As if your life depended on it. Because it does. If you didn't know that already, you would not have come to this talk. Something brought you here. And it's whatever brought you here, it is trustworthy. So your life does depend on your awareness in more ways than you think. And it depends on your awareness in more ways than you can possibly think, because thinking is only one form of intelligence, and we have many. Like, for instance, the intelligence of the body that's keeping you alive, breathing, when you forget. So you realize we're not trying to fill the silence with content, with anything. We're just allowing the silence, or you could say the field of awareness, to simply attend to whatever's arising. Whatever comes, comes. Whatever goes, goes. And we don't cling to or push away anything at all. We're just being the knowing, so to speak, that awareness already is. And the body is like a big part of it. Now imagine that tomorrow morning when you wake up, whether you're lying in bed or you decide to get out of bed and sit cross-legged on the floor or in a chair or whatever, that you actually devoted some time by the clock to, again, dropping in on yourself in this way. I will assert, based on 40 years of medical research and clinical experience, that it's like an oxygen line straight into your heart. It's a form of nourishment that we are starving for and in some ways dying for. Metaphorically and also literally. And has profound effects on emotional well-being, profound effects on physical well-being, profound effects on social well-being, interconnectedness, a sense of the deep recognition of the suffering in others, and the impulse to act in some sense selflessly to be of use to others, which is really the definition of compassion. It's not passive. It's not the same as empathy. It's the impulse to lend a hand, to carry some of the burden, which is what the word suffering means. From the Latin, the word suffer means to carry. What we're carrying. What Mark Twain was pointing to. It's all here now. We're all carrying something. Or if not now, well, maybe it's not your turn right now, but sooner or later, if you have a body, you can count on it. So it's really good to, in some sense, get ahead of the curve and experience the gratitude for things being more or less okay. And as I asserted, I mean, no matter what's wrong with you, there's more right with you than wrong with you. And could we live there? Live out of that? It would change everything, including how disease unfolds, including how long you'll actually live, because these kinds of meditative practices influence the telomeres. The talk I gave yesterday at Dallas was a talk I gave with a researcher from UCSF named Alyssa Eppel, who, studies mindfulness and the effects on biological aging in the face of stress. And the more stressed, the shorter our telomeres, which are the repeat subunits of DNA at the end of all of our chromosomes, the shorter they become. And when they run out of telomeres, the cell goes into senescence, which is effectively dies. And that's so this is biological evidence that stress can take years off your life. We sometimes say that, that experience took years off my life. It's literally true, and it's not just metaphorical. And she just came out with a book called The Telomere Effect with her colleague and collaborator, Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize in 2009 for much of this work. So this, like never before, I mean, these meditative practices are thousands of years old, but in the past 40 years, and really in the past 20 years, science has developed methods that we just didn't have when I started this MBSR 40 years ago, that understand what happens to the brain when you practice like this. And things happen to the brain, very powerful things, that you can drive neuroplasticity, you can drive what's called functional connectivity, so that memory, the parts of the brain that are involved in learning and memory connect up with the parts that are involved in what's called executive functioning, or perspective taking, or emotion regulation, or attention regulation. And all of these are things that, like growing the muscle, you're growing pathways in your own brain. That if you don't do that, or you live inside of trauma, either big T trauma or little t trauma without treatment, that actually degrades those pathways in the brain that could lead to some kind of balance. Also the chromosomes. There's a field now, didn't exist 20 years ago, called epigenetics, where, it turns out that what you eat, how much sleep you get, how much you have some connection to intimacy in your life with other people, with sense of connectedness, these, and how much you meditate, these all have an effect on hundreds of genes in your chromosomes that are either upregulated or downregulated, depending on how you live your life. And these aren't just any old genes. They are genes that underlie inflammatory processes that are now thought to be kind of the root cause of all chronic diseases. Inflammation. And proto-oncogenes, genes that have the tendency to trigger uncontrolled cellular growth. Okay? And there are studies, I won't go into it at the moment because I want to talk about the compassion studies, but there are studies taking MBSR and giving people sort of injections of capsaicin under the skin, hot peppers, chili peppers under the skin, raising blisters, and doing a randomized trial between meditators and non-meditators, MBSR versus a very highly evolved control group that controls for everything in MBSR except the mindfulness. And while the people report that everybody feels less stress, everybody feels their symptoms are reduced and everything else, this test of neurogenic inflammation, the meditators, the MBSR people, their wheels, they're called, these inflamed regions, they get they resolve much faster than in people who just get the injection, but they are in the control group that got all sorts of stuff, but not the mindfulness. So this is kind of evidence, very rigorous evidence coming out of the University of Wisconsin Center for Affective Neuroscience that this is work of my colleague Melissa Rosenkrantz and Richie Davidson, that there are biological effects when, at every level of the organism when you actually practice this being, this non-doing, and you cultivate it to the point where it, in some sense, becomes what you could call the default mode. So I'll say one more thing about the default mode. When you take people and you put them into an fMRI scanner, and you tell them, don't do anything, just lie there, in the scanner. How many of you have been in an fMRI scanner? I mean, it's loud, it's stressful, it's banging magnets and stuff like that. It's very stressful to be in. And they say, don't do anything, just lie there. And when they look at what's going on in the brain, this whole midline region of the brain lights up like crazy. There's like a lot of activity. And when you ask people, what's going on there? What's going on is thinking. And what are you thinking about? You're thinking about your favorite subject. When you're told to do nothing, you default to thinking about your favorite subject, which is me. Me. What could be more interesting than me, right? I mean, like, the center of the known universe, me. My future, my past, and then you start to perseverate and you get into whatever, and if you have a tendency to be depressed, you could like fall into what's called depressive rumination and spiral down into some black hole. Or you can get anxious, but it's all about, and a lot of it's the future. It's like, oh my God, or the past, oh my God, and so this is called the default mode. Why? Because you're told to do nothing and you default to this narrative. And my point is, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, the narrative is fine, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just the way we humans are, but it's not big enough. It's like we don't know that we're doing this narrative thing, so that's called thinking. And if we would just bring awareness to our thinking, which we never get any training in school in awareness, or you could say awarenessing, it's all thinking, which is great as long as it's not disturbed thinking or hopeless thinking or beat yourself up thinking. And awareness, we never get any training in, except that's changing now. And Rhodes College, the training in mindfulness, training in compassion. And you have to train in them because you need to exercise the muscle to really have it be reliable. So when you take an MBSR program, and they've done studies to show that, 8 weeks of MBSR compared to no MBSR, it turns out that when they look at this, at the beginning, both groups, you put them in the fMRI scanner, you say don't do anything, and what happens is, like, they both show this high activity in this region. Then after 8 weeks of MBSR, you compare them again, and the people who have MBSR, they show activity on their lateral region. And this is attenuated. It's not gone, but it's attenuated, and it's uncoupled. And when you interrogate people, like, what are you doing? What are you experiencing? They say, I'm feeling my breathing. I'm lying here. I hear the sounds of the magnets banging. There's no story. They're in the present moment with things arising, lingering, passing away, arising, lingering, passing away. And if you think, oh, those magnets, they're so stressful, they're so annoying, you let it come, you let it go, and it's like, that's what they're doing. And so you've uncoupled this narrative. You need the narrative. If you didn't need the narrative, are all of you heading home tonight after this? If you didn't have the narrative, you wouldn't know where your home is. Mindfulness is not like a quick route to Alzheimer's. I've gotten so cosmic, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I am anymore. No, it's not like You know and you don't know, and it's really important to know the knowing and to not know the not knowing part, but don't forget either, because otherwise you're going to get sort of carted away someplace. So this means that 8 weeks of mindfulness can actually transform activity in the brain, and what I think future research will show is that we're actually shifting the default mode from the default mode of doing to the default mode of being, from the default mode of thinking to the default mode of, you could say, awarenessing in the present moment. And then when you are really embodied in the present moment and something arises, you'll see it, a gorilla or anything else, and you'll recognize it. Let's say it's a flash of emotion on your grandchild's face or your child's face, and it won't go, or a patient's face, and it won't go unnoticed. And you may even notice that you caused it by saying something harmful or insensitive. This happens all the time in doctor-patient relationships, but if the doctor isn't trained in mindfulness, they may not know it. And don't forget the Hippocratic Oath. I mean, it's like the foundation, the ethical and moral foundation of medicine. First, do no harm. How would you know if you're doing harm unless you're awake enough, aware enough to actually catch those ways in which something comes out of your mouth? Have you ever had this happen? Something comes out of your mouth and you realize, oh my God, I just shot that person in the heart. And it's hard to pull the arrow back. But it's good to recognize it and apologize, and that, is healing. So here's the compassion piece. And we've been talking about mindfulness. Now, in all Asian languages, which is, mindfulness is often spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation. And the Buddha spoke about it that way, okay? But it's not Buddhist. And the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist either. And when I really want to stretch the envelope in the Bible Belt, I'll say, and Christ wasn't a Christian either, but I'm not going to say that because it's too dangerous. I've already said it, and I said it. I've said it on national TV to a Jesuit, so it's like. So. In all Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart is the same. So when you hear the word mindfulness, as I'm using it, if you're not hearing the word heartfulness, you're not actually understanding it. It's not some cold clinical thinking type of conceptual thing. It's kind of an affectionate attention. It's a kind of open-hearted presencing. Okay, with interest in the other. Okay, so people like to differentiate mindfulness from compassion, but there's really just call it heartfulness. There's no separation. And as I said, when you take your seat in this way, metaphorically or literally, it's a radical act of love. You are not trying to generate compassion, you are compassion. And so people wanted to study, is there really a difference between mindfulness as it's taught and compassion? Because there are certainly compassion-oriented meditations, just the way that you can develop meditations around gratitude, around loving kindness, around compassion, around equanimity, all sorts of different sort of characteristics of the mind and heart. So they did a very, very interesting study at Northeastern University. Paul Condon is the first author. This is 2 or 3 years ago, where they actually developed a mindfulness curriculum, and they kept all the naturally arising compassion out of it. So the teacher was kept it to the mindfulness and wasn't that nice. Because ordinarily, most of the compassion that happens in MBSR, we never use the word compassion. We just be compassionate. There's too much talk, too much mindfulness talk, not enough mindfulness. Too much compassion talk, not enough compassion. So instead of talking about it or thinking about it, just be compassionate. Just see the other, care for the other, be appropriate, be aware of being inappropriate, correcting that when you can. So they developed a curriculum that artificially, 8 weeks of mindfulness training. It wouldn't be MBSR because MBSR is totally compassionate, like relational. And then they developed a compassion curriculum, no mindfulness. So it's kind of artificial. So they trained people in it, a randomized clinical trial for 8 weeks. They trained them in this. And then they did a very interesting thing. They didn't give them a paper and pencil test and say, how compassionate you are, how mindfulness are you now? Because, of course, that would be useless. I mean, people are very, very bad reporters of their own experience. Completely unreliable. Totally unreliable. I mean, about as unreliable as, like, that's why you can't, like, you're not in charge of your breathing or your heart rate or your liver, 300 enzymatic reactions a second, and, it's like, again. So, and then they did a very interesting thing. I'm going to act it out. They found a small waiting room in the hospital. And there was only room for 3 chairs. Okay? And the person they were testing after they went through either the mindfulness program or the compassion program, waits. They come into the hospital to, at the end of the program, to sort of be tested. They don't know what the testing's going to involve, but they're just in the waiting room waiting for the testing. So they sit down. And the 2 other people in the other seats, okay? The person who comes in and sits down doesn't know that these people are part of the lab. They're what's called confederates. They're confederates. They're in on the thing. And the thing is that you're sitting there, they're filming the whole thing, and in walks a person on crutches with obvious pain in their face. These people, because they're confederates, they ain't getting up. And the test is, how often do the people in my chair get up and offer the chair to the person who's in pain? Depending on whether I was in the mindfulness program or I was in the compassion program. It's a pretty cool study. It's a very cool study. And what they found is that there's no difference. You train people in explicit compassion, and they get up like 50 or 60% of the time. I don't remember what the number was. Train them in mindfulness, they get up the exact same amount. You can't differentiate them. So it's kind of like evidence that, experimental evidence with a very rigorous test, behavioral test, because this is called the bystander effect. 2 people are not giving up their seat. Why should I give up my seat? They're not giving up their seat. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, somebody's murdered on the street. Well, there are 20 people there. They're not doing anything. Why should I do anything? Happens a lot. A lot. So my basic point is that when we cultivate awareness, it is a love affair. And that love affair is boundless, in the same way that your awareness is boundless. You'll never find the periphery or the circumference of your awareness. It's part of the miracle of being human. And you'll never find the center either. Because when it's not your awareness, so there's no me that's generating it. It's just an aspect of being human that could be inhabited, and then the world is, in some sense, much bigger, and you're much bigger, and you're not the self-centered anymore. You're centered, but you're not so preoccupied with I, my, me, mine, and the narrative that you go into in the fMRI scanner, the story of me, that you actually are more available to others, to your children, to your partners, to your spouses, to friends, to colleagues, to people on the street that you don't know. And maybe you saw if you read the New York Times, I don't know if the New York Times is allowed in Tennessee, but there was that was a joke. There was an editorial last week in the New York Times called "The Pope and the Panhandler," okay, where it was actually, the Pope was actually giving forth about how to deal with panhandlers, because there are more and more homeless people, and they're begging on the streets of virtually every city in the world. And the Pope was saying, give to them. Give to them something. But don't just throw it at them. Make eye contact with the person on the street. You know how hard this is. Then reach out and touch the hand. Touch them. This is the Pope. It's kind of like, that's what embodied compassion is. Now, you know how easy it is to write off that person and say, they're dirty, they're tattooed, you can find a million different reasons why. They're failures in life, why should I support them? They're just going to go out and buy drugs or alcohol. This is all like more narrative in your head, you don't know. And maybe the act of human kindness, one person who sees you as a human being and not as some kind of dregs on the street, that person may not benefit. They may go out and shoot up or drink. You will benefit. The first beneficiary of your compassion is you. And it requires exercising the muscle, because there will be resistance. There will be judgment, there will be narrative, and then the biggest aspect of you, your awareness, your heartfulness, will not be caught. In fact, the opposite of not being caught is being free. So in that sense, the Pope didn't say this, but I will, you could actually bow to the person who is panhandling and recognize that, and he said this, there's no difference between you. And then the last sentence of the editorial was, that's embodied compassion. So you don't have to get fancy about it. Much better to get real. But it's not easy, because we have to move into those uncomfortable places where habitually we don't want to go. And then we fall into judging. And then we fall into moralizing and holier than thou and everything else. And of course, that's all harming us. And that disease, emotional disease, it leads to physical disease. On every level of scientific evidence, as far as we can see, mindfulness is not a luxury anymore. It's an absolute necessity. And I will not, because of the time, I don't know what time we're supposed to end. I could stay forever and actually talk about this, but I have compassion for you, so I won't. But we haven't talked about the larger implications of this for institutions, for instance. What if a whole university was, in some sense, aligned with mindfulness? What if a whole city were, in some sense, or any other kind of business was put the customer first, first do no harm? What if education had a Hippocratic oath, first do no harm? What if politics and what if banking, what if investment banking had a Hippocratic oath, first do no harm? You hear what I'm saying? Okay, why not? What if the Congress actually had MBSR as part of their healthcare plan? And then it didn't have to be a Republican thing or a Democratic thing, it could be a human thing. And what if we could develop a mindful politics where it wasn't about us versus them and we just kill each other or, sort of negate each other? What if we actually recognized evidence as valuable when it accumulates to the point where it's hard to ignore? And, if you take photographs of the Earth from space and you see that all of the glaciers in the mountains are disappearing in my lifetime, and there's no ice at the North Pole in the summertime. That was unheard of when I was a child. And it's like evidence, the photographic evidence. You've got the ice core evidence, that Al Gore is famous for, showing of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's going straight up after 500 million years of being a certain way. Yes, there are fluctuations, but, and then methane, not just carbon dioxide, but the methane. Like, if we're not mindful of scientific evidence around climate change, well, then that's not that compassionate for, say, the next generations, because, like, when you're underwater, you're underwater. And if all the evidence is going in that direction, one should attend to it. How many physicians are in the audience? Any physicians? A couple. Okay, so when you go on rounds in the hospital, what do you call yourself? What do other people call you? An attending, right? You're an attending. It would be a good idea. I have a friend who just wrote a book called Attending. He's a physician, and he's talking about mindfulness in the practice of medicine. But what about medicine for the planet? What about medicine for the country? What about medicine for Memphis? What about the medicine of recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that the entire country is based on genocide that we've never, with the native peoples, that we never actually have swallowed that one in any kind of compassionate, authentic way as a nation? How about for, hundreds of years of slavery? I know I'm in the South, so I know I'm sort of stretching the envelope here, but we've never really, as a society, grasped the full dimensionality of that. And the sort of, and the economic forces that drove it and caused people to be so attached to it because of the benefit of enslaving other people and not recognizing the harm that it creates for you. Never mind the other. So there's a certain vector going on the planet, I would say, that is in the direction of us as human beings owning for the first time the name we gave ourselves as a species, which is Homo sapiens sapiens, which means from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know. We're the species that knows and knows that it knows. And that means not cognition and metacognition, but awareness and meta-awareness. I would say that our task is to grow ourselves into that name while we still have the chance. And, you don't have to watch CNN or Fox News or anything for very long to realize, things could get even more dicey than they are now very, very, very rapidly. If the world is going to heal, we've learned a lot from medicine and mind-body medicine the past 35 or 40 years that all suggest that if you misdiagnose things, you're going to mistreat them. And if you learn to diagnose the suffering of the body politic, the ignorance, the greed, the delusion of the body politic, not putting labels on it like right or left or anything like that, then maybe, just maybe, we will be able to heal the deep woundedness of our humanity and grow into the deep beauty of our humanity. And that would be the love affair. And that is an activist orientation. And this is part of the activism, non-doing, not falling into one ideology or another. I'm trying to talk from a non-dual perspective here, where we're not making separation. We're not, genetically speaking, the tallest Bantu warrior in Africa, black Bantu warrior in Africa, and the shortest jockey in the Kentucky Derby, are 99.9% genetically identical. And we kill each other and starve each other and sort of do, concentrate the wealth to a point where the income distribution is like a disease in itself for the body politic. It'd be like saying the heart wants all the blood and the lungs can go to hell. Or the liver, to hell with you, we don't like you. We don't even like the color of the liver. We're going to just go with the heart. And the feet, forget about you toes, you're ugly anyway, and so you're going to get nothing. How long do you think the body's going to be able to handle that? No, we need enough blood distribution. It's the same with the body politic. If we want, sort of well-being for one, we need well-being for all in a certain way. That is the heart of compassion. That is the heart of awareness. That's the heart of being human. But we're so into othering. We're so into racism. We're so into tacit bias. But if we're aware of our tacit bias, not tacit anymore, implicit bias, whatever you want to call it. So this is like the challenge, folks. It's not just about a little stress reduction or a longer life for me, because it's not about me, and never was. I'm going to close this, and then we can have conversation if you aren't exhausted and overwhelmed and heard far more than you wanted to hear. I'd like to share 2 poems with you, one by a woman, one by a man. The woman is dead, and the man is dead. The man just died 2 weeks ago, Derek Walcott, who won the Nobel Prize. He's from the island of St. Lucia, Afro-Caribbean. And the woman died a long time ago. Her name is Emily Dickinson. So I want you to listen very carefully, because Emily Dickinson, she used the English language in a way no one has used before her or after her. And I'll say both poems twice. And what I'd like you to do is not think about them, but hear them not through your thinking, but through your hearing, through your heart. Me from myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace, except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, how this be, except by abdication, me of me? Can you feel that? I'll repeat it. Think about like teenage love. If you were ever in love as a teenager and then it wasn't returned and you felt awful. Maybe some of you among you have had that wonderful experience and you said, I will never love again because it's just too painful. That's what she's talking about. Me from myself to banish, had I art, if I could separate in that way, my fortress, impregnable, my fortress unto all heart, feeling. I would wall myself off so I could never feel that much suffering, that much pain, that much grief. Unrequited love. Me from myself to banish, had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness, going unconscious, mindless? And since we're mutual monarch, me and me, whoever, how this be except by abdication, me from me? There's an enormous amount of pain in that. The suffering of pushing aside the unwanted in you and not welcoming it. So self-compassion is the recognition of how uncompassionate we are. And not beating ourselves up for it and just making it worse, but by actually putting out the welcome mat for all of that and understand that the you that's recognizing that is not uncompassionate. That is compassion. Heartfulness. So here's Derek Walcott's poem, which is called Love After Love. Maybe some of you know it. These are both several of my favorite poems. And Derek Walcott just died 2 weeks ago, I think. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself. To the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. Time will come when with elation, the time will come, but when? There's only one time that the time will come, if you're lucky, and that's now. Because if not now, it's going to have to be some other moment of now, but there will, until you're, of course, not around anymore, and then the time won't come. So now's the time. The time will come when, with elation, with delight, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror. What is your own door? Could the body have anything to do with it? Could the heart have anything to do with it? You greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other and say, welcome. Sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to yourself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, who you have ignored for another who knows you by heart. Take down the photographs from the bookshelf. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. Thank you, folks.
Now, Jon has agreed to take a few questions for us.
Absolutely.
Now,
if you
but
want
before
to
we
stay.
do this, now, Jon, if you'd like, why don't you get some water?
Yeah,
Back
good
here.
idea. Thank you
as
for
you
the
do that, I want to
suggestion.
let you know that some of Jon's books are for sale in the lobby. And there's some other material that you may want to take home with you. I want to let you know that Jon will be here tomorrow all day as part of a symposium that is held by Rhodes called Cultivating Compassion in Academic Communities. You all are invited to join us. It is free of charge, and it will be held across the street in Hardy Auditorium. This comes along with a number of other events happening this week, including the Vanderhaar Seminar on Friday and the Gandhi King Conference on Saturday. So there's a lot of things going on. Information about that is at the back. We hope you'll pick some of that up on your way out. So I've got one microphone here. It would be hard for me to pass around to this large group. So what I will do is recognize anyone who has a question or comment and then repeat that so everyone can hear it. Right here. Okay, I'll just hand it to you.
First, nice meeting you. First, I want to read this quote that was in your book. And it said, ultimately, it means realizing, acceptance is ultimately, it means realizing how things are and finding ways to be in wise relationship with them. And then to act as appropriate out of that clarity of vision. That quote resonated with my soul, and probably the next 3 days I turned in my resignation to the city of Memphis government. I was working the Office of Youth Services, and I said that to say that I felt like we could do more as a city related to young people, and I wanted to search out how I could increase my platform to have that impact, so thanks for that quote. The next comment or question I had was, there is a lot of talk nationally about yoga and also meditation, and it's being real effective, like in schools and particularly working with young people across the nation. And what type of insight or wisdom could you share to inspire those who are taking that work into the community to impact particularly young people?
Well, first of all, thank you for the gratitude and for the question. And I'm very touched that you made a kind of choice in your life on the basis of these kind of realizations, so to speak, in your own world. So I think I said that mindfulness is, in some sense, coming up through the floorboards in K through 12 education, and it could be in a lot of others programs for young people, in part because the teachers don't feel that they can teach, that the kids need to learn how to learn, or how to tune to themselves, first of all. And so this is a very creative opportunity in a lot of different ways. And I think the most important thing from my experience is to trust your own experience. And the more you nurture mindfulness practice yourself, the more you will know how to integrate it into other dimensions of institutions like schools or whatever. There are groups that do this, like Mindful Schools based in Oakland, that has lots of experience training teachers in this kind of thing. The New York Public Schools are doing it as well. The South Burlington, Vermont schools have been doing this for years, bringing mindfulness into their classrooms and so forth. So there's a lot of models out there that could be really, really powerful. Helps, yeah. Thank you.
Another question? Yes, back here.
Ask the question so that you don't have to repeat it. I teach acting to children, and all the teachers in my program are finding the obstacle that it becomes harder and harder to teach something that has an element of awareness and mindfulness to an ever-shrinking attention span. Do you have anything that, or directions, kind of piggybacking on the last answer, of where to go to try to even get students to be mindful for a moment?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, part of it is like, first of all, it'd be good to make it fun. And it'd be good to make it into play. So, for instance, I mean, you can challenge kids in lots of ways. Like, for instance, you could just see, can you stand like this on one leg? And kids will find this quite interesting. And, you know, it requires a certain amount of attention to your body to actually hold the body in the air like this. And then you could fly. You can do like all sorts of different kinds of, find imaginative doors into challenging them to recognize how hard it is to actually be present and to maintain balance. So when you're doing yoga, yoga is about strength, balance, and flexibility. The body's the least interesting part of it, but the kids love the body stuff. Okay, you can also do it in pairs. You could do martial art exercises. You could do Qigong or Tai Chi. You can do all sorts of things where, let's face it, kids will do anything. Where are those kids? They will do anything if it's interesting enough. The trouble with a lot of teachers is they've been teaching too long the same thing, and they're not interested in it. So if the teacher's not interested, these kids are so smart, they're going to pick up right away. The teacher's bored. So what we need to do is enliven and really, I mean, teachers aren't paid enough money. I mean, they are the people who are taking care of the next generation of human beings. They should be paid what the bankers are paid, and the bankers should be paid what the teachers are paid. Try that experiment for a year or two at least. So my point is that that's not going to happen, but to incentivize anytime soon, but to incentivize the teachers to be more playful and experimental, and to trust that the kids already know this stuff, and let them invent how to do it. You start it, and then let the creativity emerge. And all human beings are intrinsically creative and imaginative, and then education very often does the opposite of what it's supposed to do. It kills it. So like, just think, you know, about how many of you just love algebra? Okay, well, yeah, very few people. We've been immunized. How many of you have taken algebra at one point or another in your life career? Everybody has taken algebra, you know? And we've been immunized. It's like we've been immunized against algebra. We develop antibodies, never go near algebra again. Let X equal, oh my God, a panic attack. Let X equal my panic attack. But actually, mathematics is beautiful. If it were taught in a way like it's an adventure, it's like the most amazing aspect of human understanding and lack of understanding, because we don't know a lot about the universe. Did I mention about the dark matter and dark energy? Well, did I mention that or no? Oh, that was that was dinner. So anyway, it turns out that in the past 15 years, physicists and astronomers and cosmologists have discovered that that the world is made out of atoms and, atoms, 92 elements. They're all atoms, and the atoms are made out of elementary particles, electrons spinning around, protons and neutrons, and it's all weird because it's quantum mechanics and not like billiard balls. So it turns out that, and we didn't think this, we thought the whole universe was like that. It turns out that's 4% of the universe. The rest of the universe is 23% dark matter. We don't know what the hell that is. But we know it's there, and Nobel Prizes have been awarded because, and 70-something% dark energy. Don't know what that is either. But it's accelerating the expansion of the universe so that not only is the universe expanding, but it's expanding at an exponential rate, at an accelerating rate. And no one knows what the force is that's doing that because gravity should be pulling things back. So it's got to be stronger than these massive galaxies. They're all speeding away from each other at increasingly rapid rates. I mean, you can't tell that to kids without it blowing their minds. I mean, you want to make science interesting? Make it interesting. Because it's already interesting. So in some sense, if you get me going about education, I think that in the deepest ways, we're killing the love of learning. And education should be lifetime education. And if you kill it young, it's very hard to recover it when you're in middle age. So don't kill it, right? We should be sort of just first do no harm. So I don't know about the details of how to do it. If you're acting, I mean, kids love acting. I mean, kids could do Shakespeare. They could do Gilbert and Sullivan. I mean, like you can redo the words, make it about Memphis, sort of Much Ado About Memphis. Why not? So I think that the sky's the limit for this kind of thing. And when we get in touch with our own creativity and we give other people permission, including the teachers, to bring their A game to it, which is very hard because they get no support whatsoever. And it is incredibly stressful in public education. And that's why there's like a, incredible dropout rate. And the most creative teachers, they don't last more than 5 years. So this is a kind of disease, but it's treatable. If we diagnose the root causes, then it's treatable. Are there enough resources for it? Well, there's a lot of resources in this country, but if they're all hoarded by a very small fraction of the population, no, there aren't enough resources for that. And I could go on, and it will sound like, I'm proselytizing or whatever, but, when you start to bring the lens of awareness to issues around, say, the military budget or the NIH budget, and this is in the news every single day now because the budgets, or the State Department or the EPA or anything like that, your values are reflected in your budget. Okay, so if you're taking money away from health and healing and giving to military when the military is like the biggest military by far, it is bigger than China, Russia, France, Korea, Japan, and all put together, it's bigger than all that. Maybe it doesn't know what it's doing. That's a problem that more money is not going to help it with. If you misdiagnose a problem in medicine, I think I said this, you're going to mistreat it. If you misdiagnose 9/11, you're going to mistreat it. You're going to give 3 diagnoses for what went on in Iraq. All of them will be absolutely wrong, untruthful. They were known to be untruthful. And then we go to war. And it's like, have you ever walked into a antique shop? And there's always a sign in the antique shop. You break it, you own it. We walked into the antique shop of, one of the most ancient cultures in the world that we did not know anything about, and we broke it. Now you could say, well, Saddam Hussein was no gift to humanity, granted, but we did more harm than good. And then we wonder why everybody hates us. It's like medical diagnosis of the body politic would actually bring us wisdom and love, and wisdom and compassion are like two wings, one bird. Okay? So when are we going to wake up as a society? And this is not about Trump. It's not about Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats do the same thing. I mean, it's all self-interest driven by not understanding what true self-interest is. And there's a lot of suffering, a huge amount of suffering because of that ignorance. And I don't think it's tolerable when this Homo sapiens sapiens have nuclear weapons and are really psychologically really labile. Really labile. So I would say that our responsibility is distributive. It's not like mine or your congressperson or senators. It's all of us. That's what a democracy is. And maybe we need democracy upgraded, 2.0. Democracy 2.0, where we actually, it's not like getting reelected is the most important thing. What's the most important thing is taking care of the world in a way that causes the least harm and the most good, by standards that we can all agree are compassionate and kind and promote health or healing. Economically, too. I mean, we could talk about economic healing. Mindfulness is part of like what's now called neuroeconomics. We're beginning to understand that economics affects the brain. Choices affect the brain. Compassionate choices, generous choices, actually are more satisfying. It's not like you have to maximize the amount of money that you hold, because sooner or later you're going to die. All that stuff is going to revert to something else. But in the meanwhile, how much harm have you caused? And then, like Thoreau said, wake up and you realize, I got the whole curriculum wrong. That's like, that's really a human tragedy on an individual level, on the level of the planet, and on the level of the United States of America, which I deeply love. I feel very patriotic. We need to take care of it, all of us. We're the cells of the body politic. Each one of us has to do something. And so it's a real challenge. Like, what is that something? Well, that's our job, is to find out what our job is.
Before I take the next question. Go ahead.
No, we don't.
Before I take the next question, I want to let you know that Dr. Kabat-Zinn's talk will be online very shortly on a website called www.advancingmindfulness.com. If you forget that, pick up this card at the back. It's got the web address on it. Take it with you, and you can see him talk again very shortly.
Well, thank you. And it's being filmed, right? So it's not just audio.
Yep, that's exactly right.
I forgot that it was being filmed.
Other questions? Right here.
Hi.
Hello, I'm a child life specialist. So
A what?
A child life specialist. So I work in a children's hospital, and my job is to help promote healthy development.
Hold that closer so I can hear better.
Healthy development and coping for children and families.
Wonderful.
So my question is, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the busy nature of the hospital environment. And I know that you work a lot with talking about how this is related to the field of healthcare for the patient's benefit, but I'm wondering, it's just true, we can't control the busyness of the hospital, the planning for protocols, and the parents are, anxious about the future, and the patients are anxious about the results of scans and things like that. When you can't control or minimize those concerns in the way that the process of hospitalization and illness goes, how can you encourage those mindful moments in just the short seconds that there are?
And you're talking about hospitalization of children.
Yes.
Well, there are people who could basically speak to that far better than I, because I don't really have that much experience of that. But, they've gone a long way in children's hospitals to actually understand the need for that kind of sensitivity with children who maybe, have cancer or all sorts of different kinds of things. And the environment is important. The colors are important. A sense of real embodied kindness is important. Giving as much agency to the children, depending, of course, on their age and so forth, that the more mindfulness and heartfulness that's brought to the process, the more even aversive medical interventions could become like mini adventures. And so I think that imagination and creativity are really important in that regard. And then every child will be different. So part of it is you be mindful. And don't come with fixed ideas about, have you ever, in terms of adults, sometimes people are trained so that you're supposed to be welcoming to all people and stuff like that, and ask certain kinds of questions and put a happy, smiley face on your face, and it's completely contrived and false. And people feel it, but if you don't authentically embody presence, then it just feels contrived and false. So that's where the place from which you are asking this question, and because you love what you love and you're asking this question, you're probably much better at answering it than I am. And if not right now, over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years, as you develop and grow into it, this may be part of your unique contribution to at least the place where you work, but perhaps a model for other places and so forth. So don't underestimate the transformative potential of one person loving what they love and implementing it in the world in a way that you don't have to ask permission from anybody else. It's your own beauty arising, your own love that's arising, and it will serve, and a lot of people will catch it, and because it's contagious, and they'll say, wow, they're doing that over there, we should do that too. Thank you.
Out of compassion for everyone, and especially our speaker, I think we're going to call it to a close tonight.
One more question, and then we'll close.
We'll have one more question? Okay.
Yeah, let's have one more. Out of compassion for... Why don't we take this woman here, because she's had her hand up for some times. Yeah. Go ahead, shout it out. Maybe stand up. Research on ADD with children. Yeah, I don't know the woman's name. It's a long Polish name, but there are several papers that have been published out of the MARC Center, the sort of Center for Mindfulness and Compassion, I think it's called, at UCLA, on ADD. I said that mindfulness is like the training of attention, okay? And so like attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's like almost a no-brainer. Why not train it? Train attention and then see what happens with those kinds of disorders. Now, there's no magic here, and in the sort of most severe cases, I mean, it is very challenging. But there are people who are working on that, researching it, and one person that I would suggest you look at is a woman who is based in LA named Susan Kaiser Greenland, who wrote a book called The Mindful Child, and then another book called Mindful Games. And some of those may be really applicable to kids who have the diagnosis of ADD or ADHD, where, there's a double entendre in attention deficit disorder. Because it's like attention deficit, like they can't concentrate or focus for any sustained period of time. But there's another way in which the entire universe, the country, has attention deficit disorder. And again, in two ways. One is we're completely distracted all the time, and the teachers have ADD. And the other way is in which nobody's getting enough attention from anybody else because we're all the center of the universe and we don't care. So, to a first approximation. So I appreciate your asking that question. It's very, very rich and deep. But I once went to a school in Salt Lake City, or outside of Salt Lake City in South Jordan, Utah, and I wrote this up in a chapter called Mindfulness in the Classroom, in a book that my wife and I wrote on mindful parenting, which is called Everyday Blessings. And this was back in the early 90s, where a woman who had gone to an MBSR course at the LDS hospital in Salt Lake City, who was a teacher at the school, brought it back into her 4th and 5th grade class. And she had in that class a boy who was described to me as the most hated kid in the school because he was like bouncing off the walls. Nobody knew what to do with him. ADD, ADHD, up the wazoo. And she brought mindfulness into the classroom based on her experience of MBSR. She eventually asked me about it, and I said, bad idea to bring mindfulness in the classroom in Mormon, Utah. Pretty soon they'll be tarring and feathering you. But not actually, mindfulness spread throughout the school because the results she got in the class. First of all, this kid, I went and visited the classroom, and this kid who couldn't sit still for 30 seconds, he's sitting in the classroom. They had school on Saturday because it was the only day I could come. They just all came on Saturday. And the parents came too, and this boy's mother was sitting here. He was sitting here, I was sitting here, the rest of the kids were on the floor or sitting in chairs, and he guided a 10-minute meditation, and he didn't move. And he was one of the smartest kids in the class. So a lot of times kids get these good diagnoses because, people aren't paying attention to them. They need space to land inside who they are and not who the teacher needs them to be, or who the psychiatrist needs them to be, for that matter. Much easier to drug kids than to train them to exercise the muscle. So I think there's a lot of possibility here. And before we kind of give up on our children and diagnose them way more than they need to be diagnosed, we need to ask, maybe they are themselves diagnostic of the deep suffering in the family, the deep suffering in the society, where we're all running around like chickens with our heads cut off, and then, medicating ourselves to get through the day. I'll close. This will be the last thing I'll say. The words meditation and medication differ by one consonant. Meditation and medicine, same root meaning. So the fact that we were able to bring meditation into the mainstream of medicine, at first you might think it's like the Visigoths are at the gate of the citadel of Western civilization, about to tear it to pieces. And now meditation is considered a part of medicine. Why? Because of all the neuroscience and epigenetics and telomere research and everything, but mostly because of what the patients say after 8 weeks of training. They say, this is the best thing you ever did for me, to their doctors, to send me to that stress reduction clinic. And, and the real response is, I didn't do that for you, you did it for yourself. So I want to thank you again for staying, those of you who stayed, for your attention. You guys, you rock. And you're still awake.
Thank you, Jon.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.